Thanks to everybody here for coming together to talk about some really interesting issues. I know I just learned a lot. It's really hard to follow Richard Reeves. I don't quite have the same slides and pictures and images and stories, but I think it really sets the tone for this conversation perfectly. I have the challenge and the honor of moderating this first panel where we're going to be talking about opportunity and inequality. And you know, these words mean different things to different people, and I've seen it in my conversations with individuals and families, as well as the non-for-profits that we work with. My practice, I have the privilege of overseeing the southeastern region for U.S. Trust, and as you know, we are the wealth management arm for Bank of America. We work with individuals and families. We help them just to think about their impact and actually see it happen in the community. And we work with non-for-profits, and we help to think about how can we really drive meaningful solutions to the problems that are really vexing our communities. So, you know, about a year ago, I was talking with Eileen. I had the chance to meet her and Pat Matthews, a lot of other leaders here in Virginia. And we started talking about this idea, there's this tale of two Virginias. What we just learned from the opportunity research from Richard Reeves, if you look at any state, any city really, you just see there's the two communities, and there's a clear line that's really driven by income, by inequality, by lack of opportunity, and you see the outcomes in health, you see them in education statistics and workforce and housing. And so we really thought, what can we do here? What can philanthropy do? And that quickly expanded to what can philanthropy, public officials, business community, private sector partners, what can we all do collectively to really make a dent? So we're going to talk about that actually here, and I'm so delighted to have three amazing leaders, regional leaders here, representing philanthropy, education, and workforce development. Tamara Copeland, she's the president of the Washington Regional Association of Grantmakers. Dr. Bruce McDade, the superintendent for Manassas Park Public Schools, and David Hunn, who is the president and CEO of SkillSource Group. Before we go into the panel conversation, actually, I do have some trivia questions for everybody. So does everybody have their devices, our little clickers? No prize, except for bragging rights. But wanted to pick out some of the statistics from the opportunity research that really will illustrate what we're talking about today. So here, first question. Oh boy, this is fun. Of the 2.4 million residents in Northern Virginia, how many of them do you think live below the poverty level? Go ahead and take your clickers out. I'll get the cue when it's ready. Okay, good. Okay. How about that? So, over half the respondents here actually have the correct answer. We have 376,000 residents here living in poverty. It's an astonishing number. Next question. Okay, less than a high school diploma. How many of our citizens in Northern Virginia have less than a high school diploma? Okay, any minute. Interesting, okay. So, the correct answer is B, 118,000 residents lack a high school diploma. Another interesting statistic, I think 2/3 of the jobs today require some kind of post-secondary degree. So these are big numbers, and I think that they really give us concrete figures about opportunity and inequality that we're going to talk about now with the panel. So I'm going to head over here. We're going to save some time for the end for some questions. But we're going to open it up actually with a conversation representing, so we're representing philanthropy, Tamara, Bruce, education, and David with workforce and skills training. Sorry, there's a little bit of an echo. Can you just start this conversation here? From each of your vantage points, what does opportunity and inequality mean to you in your work? And Tamara, I'm going to ask you to start from the role of philanthropy.
Well, thank you, Erin. You know, I love the focus on opportunity and equality. And when I was asked to address that question, I thought, well, let's just start with the dictionary. And the dictionary says opportunity is a set of circumstances that makes it possible to do something. A set of circumstances that makes it possible to do something. And I thought, well, that definition works for me. And so I started thinking back about what are the opportunities that exist. And I think that when you disaggregate your data, and I'm ecstatic about the data that's presented through the Opportunity Index, so thank you for that. But when that information is disaggregated by race and ethnicity in particular, you get a different kind of picture of what the reality is. So there are people across this region, and certainly across the country, for whom there have been decades, if not centuries, when they were not afforded the opportunities. And if you just look at the data without looking back, without doing that back mapping and trying to figure out why, that you end up thinking that there's something wrong with those people. And so you buy into the stereotypes that have been perpetuated through the media, as opposed to thinking and recognizing that they really didn't have the opportunity. And we end up focusing our discussions and our interventions more on blaming the victims to a certain degree, as opposed to looking at the foundations that have created that lack of opportunity. So just one more word about equality. And so when we think about equality, I wonder how many people have seen that great graphic with the kids looking over the fence at the baseball game? Do y'all know what I'm talking about? So I think that it is the most powerful image to present the distinction between equality and equity. So these kids are of different heights. For those of you who haven't seen it, the kids are of different heights. They're trying to peer over the fence to look at a baseball game, and they all have the same level crate to look over the fence. Well, they can't do it. Some of them are taller, middle. They can't see. So that's equality. They all have the same crate size. The crates have the same height. So if we recognize where we are on the kind of continuum of opportunity, that it's not about presenting equal access. For some, there needs to be more access. There needs to be a different entry point for opportunity if we really want to reach what I think we want to reach, which is equity and not necessarily equality. So, thank you.
Bruce.
Good morning, everyone. Opportunity abounds in Manassas Park City Schools. When you're the superintendent of the second smallest school division in Northern Virginia, you as the superintendent can go out at 3 o'clock in the morning to drive around with the transportation folks to see if it's going to be fit to open school that day. I also do bus duty on Friday afternoon. I think that's really important to be out there, to be with the kids, and it's a ritual that I have. It's also a good way to connect with the teachers as well. So those kids expect me on Friday afternoon. Being in a small school system also provides me the opportunity to serve in many capacities. I'm also the PIO in our school system. I am the director of public relations. So if you'll just indulge me for a moment. Because if I don't put this on the website, it won't get up there. I also make a little video in the morning explaining to everyone why we delayed school 2 hours. I just did it on a whim last week. Who knew it'd be such a big hit? In small little Manassas Park, we had over 600 views at 4:20 in the morning. So it's a great strategy to explain to our constituents why we closed school. Being in Manassas Park is special. Manassas Park is a city of 2.5 square miles. We have a base of 16,000 people, and 3,500 of those kids come into our school division every single day. 65% of our kids are on free and reduced price lunch. It's been a sea change in our city. I came in 2001 as principal of that high school when the only diversity that we had back then in 2001 were 2 tables, lunch tables, during our 2 lunches. First lunch, we had a table of Latino kids. 45 minutes later, second lunch came in. Interestingly, using the same table, another group of Latino kids came in. That was it in 2001. What a sea change today in 2017. We are 60% Hispanic, and half of our kids receive ESOL services every single day. So our challenge is steep, but we rise to the challenge, and it's just a lot of fun. So what opportunities can we provide our kids in Manassas Park with a 65% free and reduced price lunch? Opportunity is ensuring that every child in grades 3 through 12, every child, regardless of background, income, or any of those factors, receives a device. And if they can't afford the technology fee, we certainly will take care of that for them. That's equality. Every child has a device. Every child in our school system, if they want to be exposed to the most rigorous curriculum we can offer, they have access. We do not have prerequisites. There doesn't have to be a GPA prior to taking the class. If a student wants to take an AP class or any honors class in Manassas Park City Schools, they certainly can try. The door is open. And the third example would be this. We have wraparound services in Manassas Park that all students, that all families have access to, and perhaps I'll touch upon that in just a moment. We have a family market with the help of the foundation here. Every month we serve over 500 families. They don't have to fill out applications, they just have to show up. We have a Nourishing Ninjas program where we deliver food to students every Friday afternoon. So that's opportunity. We don't ask for any paperwork. If those children and families want to come, they certainly can take advantage of it. Those are some opportunities that we offer in Manassas Park, and I'll touch upon some of those further along.
Good morning. In my world, the workforce world, it doesn't get any better than working with the opportunities in Northern Virginia. As I sit and talk with you today, we're looking at an unemployment rate of 2.7%, probably lower in certain parts of the region, but there is a lot of opportunity that is generally going to be determined by educational attainment and your ability to work within a very sophisticated labor market. So much of the data that was shared is so compelling when you look at the numbers, Aaron's most recent data of the numbers of adults without a high school degree or any education beyond that. I use the term that you can fill Jack Kent Cooke Stadium up with the numbers of people in Northern Virginia. It's a lot of impact on individuals and on families. The Workforce Board, led by a private sector board of directors, Todd Rowley's in our audience with United Bank, and SkillSource Group, of course, the nonprofit arm of that, led by Kim Clark-Pastis, also in the audience. We work with our state and local partners to run literally bricks and mortar job centers around Northern Virginia. Several in Fairfax, several in Prince William County, along with Loudoun County. We have job seekers coming in, employers coming in. Our goal as a public service is to bring the two together. In the unemployment areas of 2.7%, it's still amazing that we're on track to have close to 50,000 visits during the course of this year. It's very similar to where we were last year. If we were talking 6 years ago during the recession, it would have been double that. So I would suggest, particularly for the public officials in the room, there is tremendous demand for the services of workforce development, whether it's at the community college or at the centers that we're able to provide services. It's to assist someone to how to look for work in a sophisticated labor market? What are the skills that you will need to move into jobs that will support you and your family? It might not require a 4-year degree, but it's almost certainly going to require education and certifications beyond high school. I would like to think that the workforce world is opening up opportunity, Aaron, in terms of for those that are able to find their way to our centers.
Thank you. So Tamara, can you touch upon the comment that you made in your opening remarks about the history of inequality and lack of opportunity? Because I do think it's an important notion to understand the frame that you mentioned, blaming the individual without necessarily understanding the context and the systems that surround that individual.
Well, let's just start with redlining. So I suspect that most of you realize that there was a system in place in our country whereby the federal government, with great intentionality, literally drew red lines on city maps to define where home loans could be acquired and where they could not be. And typically, those red lines also divided communities by race. So when you have Black families, in particular at this point in time in our country, when this was happening, who did not have the ability to get a loan to purchase a home. So it presents this sense that people wanted to live together. They wanted to live in racial enclaves. That was not necessarily true. It created a sense that people did not want to live in the suburbs. They didn't have an opportunity to live in the suburbs. And it created the basis of a racial wealth gap that continues today. So when you look at how most people in this country acquire wealth, and wealth with a small w, not the capital W, but the small w, that is typically through home ownership. So when your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents had the ability to own homes, they also had the ability to borrow against them so that people could go to college. They had the ability to borrow when they needed to make home repairs. They had financial wealth. So just the way that we think about the reality in the world today, that we have to be aware of history and to look at how we got to where we are. And just on the topic of redlining, Aaron, I would commend to you a book called The Color of Law. The Color of Law is written by Richard Rothstein. He's with the Economic Policy Institute. And he does, I think, a phenomenal job of making information incredibly accessible. I think most people within the philanthropic community, in our local philanthropic community, have read that book now, just to become more and more aware of, in just one small area, I'm just talking housing, we aren't talking education and workforce in the other areas, but just in housing, just to get a sense of how we got to where we are.
Can I just ask you to continue on that, because you've done something pretty innovative within your own network of philanthropic leaders, foundations, funders, and it's called Putting Racism on the Table. Can you talk about that for a few minutes and why you decided to do that and what's the impact been like?
So actually, I can talk about that for 2 weeks, but I'll try to be brief. So I work with the local philanthropic community, foundations and corporate giving programs in Northern Virginia, suburban Maryland, and the District of Columbia. And as many of you will recall, a few years ago, there was a tragic incident in Baltimore where a man was arrested. His name was Freddie Gray. He was put in the back of a police van, and somehow, during the course of being transported to the police department, he suffered injuries and subsequently died a few days later. And this was on the heels of a number of cell phone videos. When Bruce brought out his cell phone, a lot of people had brought out cell phones and had captured incidents of police violence against, particularly against Black men. So when Freddie Gray died, the philanthropic community came together and they said, well, can that happen here? Well, of course it can. Well, what should we do to prevent it from happening? And so people talked about those kinds of interventions that you would imagine. They were going to put more money into education, more money into workforce, which are the number 1 and 2 areas in which philanthropy in our region and probably across the country invest: education and workforce and health. So they were talking about all of the interventions that are kind of same old, same old. And someone said, well, let's look at the threads. Let's look at what's undergirding this. And there was a realization that there was an issue of race. And we felt that perhaps we had had the Bull Connor moment. And for those of you who aren't old enough to remember, it's a civil rights moment where the dogs and the water hoses were captured on television and still photographs of what was happening to unarmed teenagers and protesters, particularly in the South. So the cell phone videos, many people thought may have been kind of that Bull Connor moment. Bull Connor was the chief of police. But anyway, so what we recognized was there was a moment in time where we had the opportunity to delve deeper into a topic, not to look at the presenting situation, but what created the presenting situation. And we thought that it wasn't personal animus. It wasn't the way that we typically define racism, but it was structural racism or systemic racism along with implicit bias. And the philanthropic community decided that they wanted to learn more about that. And they undertook what I think was pretty phenomenal, a 6-month learning journey where over the course of 6 months, they devoted 3 hours once a month to exploring in depth some aspect of structural racism, systemic racism, and implicit bias. And because of that, I think that there is a recognition of how the disparate treatment of people undergirds presenting problems. And if we only address that presenting problem, we will continue to have the kind of statistics that we saw up here and are in the opportunity index, that we truly have to delve deeper. So the putting racism on the table was truly to look at what is the undergirding reality, the Richard Rothstein stories of the world, the redlining stories that have presented the problem. Because if we don't, in some instances, dismantle the systems, we can't tinker around the edges. It's going to still be there. We have to have that level of recognition of the problem that we really want to address change.
That was impressive in 5 minutes, a very complex subject. But I think it is important. We do, as a society, tend to place a greater emphasis on the individual versus the systems, and in many cases, philanthropy has been putting significant resources against these challenges, and yet, on the whole, seeing them get worse in some cases. And I think getting deeper into that conversation is really interesting. David, can you actually take a couple of minutes to talk about a relatively new, I would say, concept, if you will, here regionally, but also in other parts of the country that gets underneath these issues? I'm speaking about community wealth building, and particularly how it really engages those individuals that are typically, with that bottom level on Richard's chart.
Thank you, Erin. So starting last fall at the Community Foundation's leadership and their request, I had an opportunity to work in a pro bono effort to assess really the opportunity for implementing a community wealth building effort here locally in Northern Virginia. And if, for those of you not familiar with community wealth building, it really emphasizes creating opportunities for low-income adults and families to build up assets and ownership over time so that the benefits of the economic activity remains local. So much of our economic development efforts that are funded at the state and local level are intended to bring industries and companies from outside in. And that's a great thing, and that's why we're in this beautiful facility today. But I would suggest, and many of the academicians behind community wealth building really want to see, how do you grow from within? How do you strengthen underutilized local assets to make a community more vibrant? and it's about developing assets so that the wealth stays local. So we've worked, a team of us here. In fact, let me stop. I think a number of you are in the room. Would you raise your hand if you were part of this local effort? For those of you who are interested in learning more, please reach out to someone who's raised their hand, because there's going to be an ongoing effort. We're referring to this as stage 1. But during stage 1, we thought the greatest impact was in looking at building assets for existing career pathways for youth and young adults. And again, in my world, we look at a young adult from 17 to 24. It's just that area of maturation and continued independence. And we wanted to really see how to examine how to better coordinate the efforts of employers, public sector, and nonprofit sector that would work with less skilled and lower income adults throughout our region. So our next steps will be, sorry for the background noise, we'll be continuing to work with employers such as many of you who are interested in hiring and retaining younger workers. All of us in this room have to make sure that the public employment programs that myself and my colleagues oversee, that we're producing the workers that have the qualifications that are needed by employers. Bottom line, educational attainment, credential attainment, work experience. But we must also hear from employers about the issues that are impacting the young workers' success on the job. We welcome the opportunity to speak with employers to really offer asset building growth strategies that will grow and retain talent in the region. So it's a bottom-up approach, Aaron. It's not going to happen overnight, but clearly I think the ground is ripe.
So we talked a bit about education, or education is one of the structural supports, really the core of what communities can be doing to help move the needle on economic mobility. Bruce, you sit in a really interesting role within your school system, and certainly the demographic changes you just mentioned have really changed what education is today. And just for everybody's clarification, what does poverty look like in your classroom? What does it actually do to a child and his or her ability to learn? And what does it mean for you and your staff and your teachers?
Well, again, getting back a little bit to the context, we often get overlooked in Manassas Park because we're surrounded by the behemoths, Fairfax County, 187,000 students, Prince William County, which surrounds us almost in its entirety. Loudoun County is to the north. The city of Manassas is next door. So we're this little jewel right in the center of it all. And we're nimble, and we can do some things. And that's the exciting part about these initiatives that I highlighted, the one-to-one initiative, the open enrollment, the wraparound services. We can make things happen very quickly, and that will be my closing pitch to all of you before I leave. I've brought lots of cards with me here. But our goal would be, in this small little school system, these 4 buildings, 3,500 kids, knowing we have such a high poverty rate. We are #1 in the state in terms of serving students for ESOL services. Again, 50% of our kids receiving services on a daily basis. Our hope would be that poverty would be invisible. If every student has a device issued by the school system, the goal is to be certain that all those devices are the same. For example, some of our more well-to-do families came to us when we rolled out the one-to-one initiative, which we affectionately call MPCS Connects, now in its 3rd year. Their goal was to say to us, my child doesn't need that device. My child doesn't need a Chromebook. My child has this device, which is completely fine. In fact, it's so much better than a Chromebook. And our answer was a resounding no. We're going to level the playing field. Everybody is going to be using the same device. So in that respect, we would hope that with that level playing field, the equality piece of this, that poverty would be invisible. But we know it's not. We have kids coming to school in the middle of winter on those days when I don't close school. Bad guy, right? Not dressed appropriately. No winter coats, some of them in shorts. It's very, very sad to see. So it's not invisible. We have kids coming to school homeless. We have kids coming to school who are hungry. Hence the need for these wraparound services like the Family Market and the Nourishing Ninjas program, which, by the way, one of our snow days happened to be on that Friday. It was the first Friday in January. Do you remember many schools closed because of not bad weather, not excessive snow, but because it was cold? And every time we close school due to inclement weather, I worry about 2,000 mini cougars not getting 2 meals a day. That's the reality. So what we did, those Nourishing Ninjas, we got together, we took those bags, we filled up our vans, and we went out into the community. And we delivered those packages to the kids. Otherwise, they wouldn't have anything for the weekend, in all likelihood. That's what poverty looks like. And when you knock on the door, and those kids come to the door, they're very happy to see you. But there it is right there as well. So our goal is when they're ours during the school day, we're going to be certain that poverty is invisible, knowing that is not. This requires a different kind of teacher. When we go out and recruit, and tomorrow actually happens to be our first recruiting trip, I'm down at UVA tomorrow, the type of teacher that I'm looking for, that I'll be trying to pluck out of the audience tomorrow down in Newcomb Hall, is going to be that educator who is not only concerned with academic success within the classroom. I'm looking for that educator, that millennial who wants to make a difference, who wants to feel valued, make an impact. And that's what millennials want. In Manassas Park, we can offer that.
You know, I want to pick up on that. Actually, I was interviewing somebody who was quite a colorful character talking about education, and he said, you know what I learned about improving or looking at the teaching issue when it comes to reducing inequality and promoting opportunity is in some schools, there are good teachers, but in some schools you need like the Navy SEALs of teachers. And I think that that's what we see when you're dealing with these sorts of numbers and the types of issues that come to the classroom. Can I just ask everybody here to take a step back and think about this, is extending your work into the community. So when students go home, what's happening with the school system? How are you engaging those families? Tamara, David, what you are seeing from both your vantage points in terms of really meaningfully supporting families and communities. What are some of the more innovative things that you're seeing, here, or in other parts of the country that you'd like to see here? Tamara, do you want to?
So one of the things, just to stay on housing for a minute, we all recognize, and particularly in this room, the lack of affordable housing in our region. And there just isn't any question about it. And the number of families who are homeless. So when we started thinking about that in the philanthropic community, we weren't exactly sure how to enter that space, what we could do. And it's a very complicated financing mechanisms, et cetera, and we weren't sure what the role of philanthropy might be. And so we partnered with an organization called Enterprise Community Loan Fund, and they provide loans to developers to create housing units. And we set up what's called a note, a financial tool, called Our Region, Your Investment. And it's so that philanthropic institutions can put money into this note. It does not affect their giving. So if you're an arts funder or a workforce funder or an education funder, you are still doing that. This is not a grant. This is how you invest the corpus of your funds, so that you invest in a vehicle that not only earns you money, it's a guaranteed rate of return, but it also does good in the community. So this is important, I think, because Our Region, Your Investment, is, as the note is called, and those in the room who are looking for an investment, this is a great one. There's a $5,000 floor. You have to invest $5,000, but so could your your school, your church or synagogue, whatever, any group that you're a part of can make an investment. And so far, the philanthropic community now has put in, we started out with a $5 million goal. We now have, I think, close to $13 million in the fund. We have five housing initiatives underway, 3 in the district, one in Fairfax County and one in Prince George's County, and there are others in the pipeline. But even as, and I'm very proud of this, I think that it's a very tangible way in which philanthropy writ large as a community has engaged in addressing a community problem. But it's all about apartments. It's all about rental units. We still aren't creating wealth. We are creating housing, and I don't want to minimize that at all. But what we're looking at now is what is the way that we can start creating homes that can be purchased. Citibank has an interesting initiative in New York City that's based on land trust, and I am in the very early stages of learning about land trust, so I don't want to reflect how ignorant I am about it. But what I do know is that if you can create a partnership with government in New York City in which land is set aside in New York to build homes that can be purchased, and not only can those homes be purchased by people at a lower income, they can also sell them. So it's not that they can only purchase them, it's a way for them to build wealth. So I'm making up these numbers, but if they are selling them and they're making a profit of $40,000, they don't get to keep the whole 40, let's say they get to keep 20, and 20 goes back into the initiative. But nonetheless, it's a way to start building wealth. And so we're trying to learn more about how New York City and Citibank really created that partnership so that we can look at how we create homes that can be purchased in our region.
David, you look like you have something you want to say. I was going to point to you to follow up on that. Please.
May I follow up? So let's stay on the theme of great practices or innovative practices. I think that's where you wanted us to go. And I'll speak on the workforce side. And I really would like to highlight, going back to some of the data that Michael showed us, his numbers suggested about 16,000 young adults, 16 to 24, in our 3-county area were neither working nor in school. And that window is what I want to spend my time on. So the barriers that we would see typically, what's happening with those young people? Well, typically they might be having reading, math, or language arts challenges that they're probably at a 9th grade or below level, even if they're high school graduates. They could have some engagement in the justice system, either as a juvenile or as an adult. They could be, at that young age, be a mom or a dad. Or they might even have a documented disability. So these are some classic ways that we would look at how might the public sector or a partnership respond back. But I think more telling in putting a business case, a business perspective on this, is that the Federal Reserve Board has suggested, it has estimated that for every young adult in that age group that is not attached to education or employment represents a societal cost of $1 million per person over the course of their life.
Wow.
Timing was impeccable. So you take our 16,000 and then you look at the greater Washington region of maybe 61,000 according to the Brookings Institute, and nationwide multiple millions, roughly 1 in 7 young adults. So that to me is, I think, where the opportunities are, where investments can be made. Real quickly, to its great credit, the U.S. Congress has instituted what they're calling a Pay for Success project, where they're encouraging local governments, local workforce boards like ours, to work with employers, work with the private sector, and to be paid on the success of helping move that population into better circumstances. I'm pleased to announce that this local workforce board was the first in the nation to sign a contract with Fairfax County government where we will work with the providers and pay them a bonus to move adjudicated young adults or young adults leaving foster care into a better circumstance in education or employment. That to me is, I think, where the national government's going to be going, and ideally funders as well, Aaron, in terms of how we might do things differently.
So with much credit to policymakers in Richmond, they've come to their senses and realized that there is an over-reliance on standardized testing. They say in Virginia, we've never met a standard nor a test we didn't like. So we're coming off that, and we're focusing more now on performance-based assessment, thankfully. With that comes an opportunity, and this is my pitch to all of you, and I'm very impressed and intrigued by your comments. There is something out there now called the profile of a graduate. Beginning with the incoming 9th grade class, things will look very different for these kids. Again, not so much reliance on SOL testing, but more of a reliance on the 5 C's. And I had to write them down because I always remember 4 and I can't remember the 5. Communication, critical thinking, collaboration, creativity, and citizenship. This fits in very nicely to what we're doing at Manassas Park High School. We have a program called COMPASS, which stands for Creative Opportunities at Manassas Park to Achieve Student Success. There's more of an emphasis now on real-world experiences. And to that end, we've developed a program that will kick off next year. We have a lot of 18-year-old kids coming to our schools. 18-year-old kids who have no credits. Coming from another country, maybe they haven't been in school for 4 or 5 years, but boy, do they have a work ethic. So what we want to do is to capitalize on those overage kids who want to succeed, whose parents want them to succeed, to do something we think would be very special for them. I know there's always been a concern about having internships where you're taking kids in who are underage. Here's an opportunity with Profile of a Graduate and Manassas Park Schools to take 18-year-old kids now. We have them on half-day schedules because of a creative schedule that we run called the 4x4, where it's like college. They take 4 classes in the fall and 4 in the spring. We're going to set some opportunities up where we can have extended periods of time for these kids to be with you, and we'll tie it to their academic program. Now, if you can't reach out to me in Manassas Park, I understand that. All schools will be faced with that challenge. We can just make it happen a little bit quicker because we're smaller, and I am the PIO, the bus director, and I'm the red tape, as they say. So that's a pitch for the future. I have lots of cards. If you want to talk, let's talk.
Do we have time for 1 or 2 questions from the audience? Okay, great. Let's open it up for some questions. I think I see a hand up over here.
Hello.
Great.
Hi. Oh, hi. My name is Lauren Unger, and I'm a job coach for Fairfax County Community Service Board. And I want to thank you all for coming and talking. Everything has been so informative. My question to you is, since Virginia is an employment-first state, how do you think supported employment could tie into some of the problems or the barriers that you're addressing as far as working with somebody individually to help them one-on-one achieve some of these outcomes that we want, where they complete their education and then they move into employment or they do an internship?
And I think the basis of your question is, what can Virginia do, or what can we do?
Yeah, or what's your understanding of how supported employment can help address some of the things that you're talking about?
Well, I think that's a kind of a two ways to look at that. One is, how do we encourage the employer or an employer to create work sites to allow a placement? And I think in your example would be someone with a disability that might need some supportive employment efforts as well.
Sure. This Community Service Board of Fairfax County also helps people with mental illness or substance use disorders or just general Fairfax County residents. They'll help them one-on-one to gain employment. And so
Right.
It just feels like it kind of is in line with everything that you're talking about.
Right. So I guess, and I would even say our organization, SkillSource, we're a ticket to work employment network. So we're helping adults with who are receiving SSI or SSDI. They are receiving some federal benefits, and I have to say that they want to work. They want to find employment. They might have some supportive needs. Many of them, if they were on disability insurance, they were already working prior. And how do we help them reintegrate back into back into the workplace. I mean, even if it's starting out in a less in a less sophisticated role than they were before. I think it gets into employer engagement. I think it gets into how to incentivize the worker, him or herself. There's a variety of ways, but I will say this, for those as you get to know our business, it's heavily regulated, probably on the CSP side as well as on our side, how we can spend federal and state and local dollars and how best then to incentivize the employer and the worker alike. I'm sure we could talk more offline that I could probably learn from you too.
Okay, thank you.
Time for one more? Okay, one more. Great.
Hi, my name is Mary Brown. I'm the director of DC Promise Neighborhood Initiative, and totally love the work that Ms. Copeland has been doing in this region, lifting the veil off of all the isms vis-a-vis the philanthropic community. I want to contextualize my inquiry. I've pulled together actually a group of elders in the community, and the Kenilworth Parkside community looks very much, well, it's African American, but I'm very much like you, David, where I'm in the mix with absolutely everything. And I pulled together elders, I pulled together youth from the community and parents, and I asked them about equity. It went over their heads. They didn't quite get it. And then as I began to drill down, and I pulled out the exact diagram, Ms. Copeland, with, okay, well, this is equality and this is equity. And one of the elders said, well, hell, why we got a fence? I don't want the fence. You know, why we got a fence here? Why we got a... And then some of the students who at the time, they were celebrating Kwanzaa, they said for them, it's kujichagulia, which in Swahili means agency, the ability to name ourselves and direct our paths and to have the wherewithal to move ourselves in the right direction. The question I have to you, is the conversation of equity becoming inequitable? Is the conversation of equity becoming a bit elitist? If so, what are we doing to ensure that, as you brought out, Mr. McDade, that we're working from the inside out so that the children and families, like the children and families you work with, David, that are actually a part of this movement? So it's a two-part question.
So just to start the conversation, thank you for the question. So we certainly recognize that the philanthropic community is a pretty ivory tower elitist community. So as we are looking at how do you define racial equity, we are going into communities. So we will be having community conversations with both community leaders and with residents of the communities to define what they think a racially equitable region would look like. We've had the first one in Montgomery County. We're in the process of planning one for this region, for Fairfax County. And so the intent, I do think though, Mary, that it is true that we don't go through most of us don't go through our everyday worlds thinking about equity or thinking about equality. So part of our responsibility is to educate and to help people to understand the level of inequity and inequality. We took as one of the guiding principles for our work a quote from John Gardner, who founded the independent sector, and he said, "The first step in leadership is not action, it's understanding." So I think that we do have a responsibility to help people who have been kind of inundated with messages that suggest a certain reality, that perhaps that reality is not real.
I think we're out of time, but I am really glad that we ended on that point, because we touched upon this not too long ago when I first met with Eileen and a few others, talking about the role of philanthropy. And a very smart woman on our panel, Melody Barnes, said that there is a sentiment in the community where philanthropy looks to invest that so far you have done nothing for us without us. And I think that's a really important acknowledgement of being intentional in terms of working with communities, speaking with communities, engaging communities as part of the solution. That, I think, we're on the verge of a tipping point, and I would certainly encourage everybody to think about that as you go back into your own worlds. So I think that's it, and I just want to thank this amazing panel, and thank you to everybody for coming, for listening to this talk.
All right, we have some pop quiz to give you. And I'll invite our panels up. So Lovey and Jacqueline and Ken, while you're coming up, before our pop quiz comes on, I'll give you a bonus question here. What major at the University of North Carolina in 1986 had the highest average starting salaries? Anybody guess? Geography. Michael Jordan was a geography major at the University of North Carolina the year I graduated. So, all right. All right, let's get our questions. Are they up yet? Okay. Pop quiz. Northern Virginia has about 1.8 million adult residents, excluding children. How many of our 1.8 million adults have some college, an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, or an advanced degree? A, 800,000, B, a million, C, 1.2 million, D, 1.4 million. And the answer is, everybody says 3 or C. And the answer is C. Almost 70% of the adults in our region. We're a highly educated population. I know each of you know that. This is shown in the Opportunity Index that we heard this morning. Okay, question 2. Out of approximately 68,000 3- and 4-year-olds in Northern Virginia, how many are enrolled in nursery or preschool? A, 20,000 to 25,000. B, 25,000 to 30,000. C, 30,000 to 35,000, or D, 35,000 to 40,000. And the answer that you give is D, and you are again correct, showing how educated and smart we are. 53% of all 3- and 4-year-olds in the region above the state and national levels. So very good class. I'll step over here to the panel. Very quickly, we have, is this on? There we go. What a great panel we have today for this. And so on my immediate left is Jacqueline Welch, who is Vice President of Human Resources, Diversity and Inclusion, a Senior Vice President at Freddie Mac, and has had a marvelous resume in this area and background, and great work that she and her organization. I just want to give a special shout out to Freddie Mac for supporting one of my favorite workforce development organizations, one of our great partners, Year Up. And Freddie Mac does wonderful work, and we appreciate you being here. Lovey Hamill, sitting next to it. Lovey is well known in this region, the president and co-founder of Employment Enterprises, a workforce savant for many companies in this region, and consultant in providing so much wise advice to many in this region on workforce, and has been a great leader in the chamber and multiple economic efforts through this region. And Lovey, we thank you for being here today. And at the end, my friend Ken Eisner, who Ken's title, he's Senior Manager of Worldwide Education Programs and the Global Lead for Amazon Web Services. Ken, thank you for being here. Just one ground rule, while Ken is a very important and high-ranking official at Amazon, we're not going to ask him any HQ2 questions today. So just that one ground rule. But my first question, I am going to start with Ken. Ken, are you comfortable? Do we need to get you any orange juice or a pillow, anything we could do for you? Just everything okay? Please, we have many people who are prepared to bring you anything you need, so just let us know, all right? All right, you're first to get to start off here. I mean, your organizations and you personally have not only taken unique interest in developing workforce assets, broadly developing workforce assets, but you've also been very innovative in your actions and particularly your organization's practices. Tell us briefly a little bit about what you're doing in these areas, and importantly, why? Why is it so important to you and your organization? So, Ken, you look like you're ready to go down there. All right.
First of all, thank you. I'm excited to be here. I came to the DC region, Northern Virginia region. Oops. There you go. In '97, raised my
got married, raised my kids, and certainly that passion for the region and that belief in the great things that we can do here stem from my desires and hopes for my kids. I run a program called AWS Educate. It's a global program to provide students and teachers around the world with free access to a series of cloud-related tools to embed into classrooms and outside of classrooms to prepare students for that next generation workforce. It includes free access to content, free professional development, access to micro-credentials and pathways into cloud jobs. And then we have actually a job board, because the end goal of everything we do is providing students with access to jobs in fast-paced, high-paying world of the cloud. We offer this both online through partnerships. Some quick stats on the program. It's a global program in over 150 countries, over 1,500 educational institutions, hundreds of thousands of students. And some of while we're in all the top global leading computer science institutions, we have great institutions such as Scott's, Miami-Dade College, community colleges in Los Angeles that are really the driving force, because they're digging deep into their communities and creating those long pathways for kids from K-12 into community college and into the workforce. Why I do this? Again, it stems from my kids, or probably before I was going to have kids, a deep passion for education, the work that I've been involved in. I grew up in Center City, Philly. Just got to give a quick shout out to the Eagles. And I grew up in a very diverse community. I believe that in the U.S., in Northern Virginia, in communities abroad, we need to have a much deeper focus on underserved and communities of color. I joined Amazon because I thought Amazon was in a great position to make a giant impact in this space. We're just scratching the surface. We're humbly working with educators and faculty and students around the world to make that happen. But Amazon has this series of leadership principles. Think big, bias for action, invent and simplify, customer obsession, which really, for me, is educators, students, and institutions at really making change. They impact the way I think about, deeply impact the way I think about scale. So we need to automate everything. We need to, I'll talk about partnership, a budding partnership with Scott and team, but everything that we do produces for the global community. So it's write once, replicate many times around the world. Amazon birthed Amazon Web Services, or the cloud division of Amazon, where I now sit. AWS is over $10 billion. It was the fastest IT vendor to ever hit $10 billion. It's now an $18 billion yearly run rate. It's growing 42%. It's creating this giant sea change in job demand, job opportunity. But we can't fill those jobs quick enough. I think Glassdoor threw out a study a few years ago, between 2009 and 2015, the time to hire increased by 80%. We cannot find individuals for those jobs. People who say that we can, and there's a budding workforce to fill all of these new tech jobs, they're lying to themselves. There is a giant demand, and we need to be getting out on the ground floor to upskill people for this workplace. With Amazon, this notion of thinking big, iterating quickly on what we do, embedding the ability to fail and then iterate within our students, the notion of partnering with educational institutions at the ground floor, not just at the jobs level or the providing of devices, but rather being in there to change curriculum, to map those learning objectives to future jobs, to embed into students the ability to deal with ambiguity. The world's changing at such a fast pace, and to enable them to be comfortable with failure and learning from that is so key to the work that we do. And so it necessitates a much richer partnership with educational institutions. And again, we've seen such wonderful reach out by institutions, by faculty who are doing amazing things, teaching us on a daily basis, but also partnering with us on that journey.
Thank you, Ken. Love you. You were involved in workforce development in this region before workforce development was cool. Tell us what you're up to now, and why are you so passionate about this?
Well, that's why I have this crazy hair. Is this on? Is it on? There it is. Okay, well, yes, I was in workforce way before, and that's why I have all this crazy hair. I owned employment enterprises, and I've been in the workforce solutions business for 36 plus years. That's as far as I'm going, plus. And I have just learned so much today, so thank you. I want to do a shout out to Eileen for pulling this group together. Because it's hard to get all walks of life in here, from businesses to nonprofits to those that are in the education. And I love to see it because I believe there is a huge workforce transition going on. And we're talking about parts of it up here in statistics and what different companies are doing. But my world has been across the United States in workforce solutions. We provide around 3,000 people in jobs, and the whole goal for every customer that we work with is to attract and retain good talent. And right now, this transition is such that we are retiring 11,000 people a day, and we only have 80% of those that can even be filled because we don't have the demographics. This isn't even the education level. We don't have the people to fill those jobs. So every company, no matter what size you are, you're being affected by this. So having everybody in here in Northern Virginia to talk about it becomes really important, because talent's going to go where there's an ecosystem to support them. And I think that that's where, here in Northern Virginia, since I travel around the country, we have the advantage, and we need to keep that. But we do have to set the stage. We have to set the stage within each of our businesses. If you're going to have that many retirees moving out, and they want to do it in the next 3 to 5 years, they got a little bit delayed with the Great Recession, and the housing prices went down, and the people were saying, well, maybe I'll just work a little bit longer. And they have. And all of a sudden they're looking around and saying, those housing prices are back up again, and maybe this isn't the best winter that I want to stay in Northern Virginia. And we're really starting to see that in every company that we work with. Oh my goodness, I knew they were going to retire, but I didn't think it was this year. Oh, what am I going to do? So we're working with customers right now and saying, let's get ahead of that curve. Why don't you go and start saying to people, who wants to retire in the next 3 years? I got a great job for you. Because this is a great time to use that workforce. You have about 3 years when they start talking about wanting to retire. Use that workforce to help bring in and leverage in your next workforce. You don't want them doing that same job for the next 3 years and then you have to go recruit someone. That's traditional, and that's not going to work anymore. You want to take that retiree and say, I'd love for you to start working with the new group that's coming in. I'm going to give you a project. And I have a great example of a gentleman that we call it the Dan story in our organization, that didn't really want to leave the organization, but knew the time was right. But also knew the organization wasn't ready. They couldn't sustain his department in his area, which was very important because it was the sales side of the business. And some of you that are in sales, you understand you can't let that top salesperson walk out and not have sustainability. So they agreed they really couldn't afford to keep him and find somebody else. So what they decided to do is put a retiree program in and have him come back and for the next 3 years set up that sustainability. But they couldn't pay him what they were paying him originally. Of course not. Can't have 2 and 3 people in one job. But they said, we'll pay you this. You can pretty much set your own hours. You can be flexible, but we need to get results. He didn't think maybe he wanted that because that price tag didn't, should I stay and work? Sort of want to work, I want the flexibility. But he did, so he said, why don't you give me a commission plan so that if I get the results you want in the next 3 years and I develop an apartment and we get the new group in here that's going to hit goals, you'll pay me out a commission at the end of each year on what I've been able to do. In my organization, we call those that was the largest commission check for 3 years that we ever wrote to someone. It was a great example of a retiree saying, yes, I am willing to get up out of my chair. I am willing to go and help get that new group of people into your organization. I will take a little less dollars up front, but if I really knock it out of the ballpark, you'll have that extra money to pay me. So I'm saying to everyone as we talk about new people and a new transition and a new workforce, let's merge our current workforce with the new group that's coming in. You have the knowledge gap that will need that knowledge gap being talked about. It's an internal workforce development, and it can complement any partnership that we've talked about in the room today. So I love workforce. I love having change all the time, and this is an evolution we all need to be thinking about right now.
Thank you, Lovie. Jacqueline, Freddie Mac, unique organization, unique workforce development perspective. Tell us what you're doing and why.
Good morning, everybody. So I have a lot of upfront declarations to make. Number one, but first I want to say thank you very much for allowing me to be here as part of this day. The first declaration for context is I have been working for Freddie Mac now just north of a year. I started on December 5th, 2016, which is to say I know diddly squat about the region. But I do obviously know a lot about Freddie Mac now, having been there employed now for just north of a year. So I thought, for anybody, so raise your hands if you even know what Freddie Mac is or what it does. Oh, well, okay, that's good. So that we have brand equity here. But here's some facts and figures that I think will be helpful in terms of putting my comments into some kind of context. So Freddie Mac is a mission-driven organization. It's what's called a government-sponsored entity, along with Fannie Mae. And to make it the most simple that I can, basically Freddie Mac exists to make home possible. So I was really disappointed that you didn't get to your housing slide, so maybe you'll indulge me in a sidebar conversation. But certainly the prior panel that discussed sort of housing, that's our space, and I can confirm some of the statistics that were shared just relative to two of the businesses that Freddie Mac is in are single family, which of course is home ownership, and then multifamily, which is rental. And while single family is the largest revenue contributor to the Freddie Mac bottom line, multifamily is the fastest growing for a lot of the reasons that were intimated during the prior panel, so I can confirm that. But back to who Freddie Mac is. So roughly 6,200 people, primarily domiciled here in Northern Virginia, right next door. In fact, I almost went to work instead of coming here out of habit, and I was like, no, I'm going to the thing. So here, Northern Virginia, 4-building campus, 6,200 people roughly. There are also employees in Atlanta, Chicago, Dallas, New York, and LA, but mostly here in the Northern Virginia area. The vast majority of our employees live in Fairfax County, 37% of the employee population, and we've got another high representation out in Loudoun, another 21% there, and then sprinkled throughout the area. This is not the 1%, but we're certainly not the 99%. The median income of a Freddie Mac employee is $124,000. And we don't have any hourly employees, but if you took an hourly rate, our hourly rate is $38 per hour. So this is a fairly wealthy population. In terms of what the company does, I'm keenly interested in what the panelists will say relative to technology and how we're sort of developing around technology. The majority of our employees, or I'll give you a little bit of a sort of background too in terms of the employee profile from an ethnic and racial perspective. The majority of our employees, 55%, are non-white. So those earlier statistics that got kicked off, I was like, yes, confirming that would be true, certainly for Freddie Mac. 55% are between the ages of 30 and 49. Our average tenure is about 8.4 years. 75% of our employee population are salary and not hourly. And so, you know, everything, I'm just giving you these stats because everything you've heard today so far, using Freddie as a proxy, I can confirm is true. So there are 3 income earning components to Freddie Mac. I've already mentioned single family, multifamily, and then there's also the investment and capital markets group. And then the remainder of the employee population are in support functions. A whopping half of our population is in technology, which is shocking to me. And so when you step back and think about that, I'm stunned by it. The other thing to say about Freddie Mac is it's been around since 1970. So 1 in 4 home purchases have gone through the Freddie Mac system, 1 in 4. And if you think about all the data, how many of you have owned a mortgage, right? So I didn't know anything about mortgages, except I owned one when I started for Freddie, and now I know more than a layperson should. But we all are familiar with the amount of data that are connected with applying for a mortgage. And so over time, Freddie Mac has become not only a market mover with respect to housing, but also the owner of a lot of really important data, which I think is what drives sort of this focus on technology. So now, having said that about technology, I go, okay, so I run human resources. I think partly I'm here is because clearly Freddie Mac has a stake in the game and the success of the Northern Virginia region. But I also enter it with the perspective of the future of work, right? So I'm in human resources. People are my business, right? So I think about human resources and what are the implications for any institution as it relates to technology and all of these emerging trends. So here's some more declarations. So I'll be 48 years old in a couple of weeks. And I say that because when we started talking about employee populations in terms of age demographics, right? I was in my early 20s at the time. And remember, it was radio baby, baby boomers. These terms now are part of the parlance, but they were new, right, back then. And I remember at the time that my generation, Generation X, was characterized as what we would have between 6 and 8 unique employers over the course of our lifetimes, right? And I can remember reading this and thinking, this is completely newfangled hogwash, right? I am first generation born American. My parents are from Central America, so confirming yet more data that you heard this morning. And my dad is your atypical, worked for the same company, retired after 25 years. So I had absolutely no context within which to even absorb this idea that I would have between 6 and 8 different unique employers over the course of my working life. So jump forward a little while ago, and the panelists have heard this, and we were talking about this call. I'm reading an article, and the article posits that kids today, kids meaning high school kids today, over the course of their working lives will have between 12 and 14 unique employers. And at first I go, that's just hot. Wait a minute, 1, 2, 3. And I realize that, in fact, I'm on my 6th employer. So if it's true for me, then it's okay to assume that this data is not as newfangled and crazy as I thought. So I go, we merge that, and this is a cliff I think we're all standing at kind of admiring before we kind of leap into the abyss. If that's true, I go as a human resources person, I talk about things like upskilling and training and development, or even practical things like wages and health insurance. What in the world am I going to do with people who are going to stay with the organization I support in 2-year stints? How does any of that work? And then with the rapidity with which technology, I mean, so this iPhone is the 10th version, right? I have a 12 or soon to be 12-year-old. It didn't exist when he was born. And now it's gone from fairly interesting new technology to I'm wholly dependent on it. And I go, what is the, no, seriously, wholly dependent. I promise you I was the last Western woman to own a cell phone because I was like, I can't post bail for anybody and I can't do CPR. Who's calling me for an emergency? My husband made me get it and I was just sort of, and now I have turned around in traffic because I left it at home. But the point of that diversion is the technology that drives this. Are people learning this in school? So now I have this question around, I mean, I'm very intrigued by this whole community college versus four-year university, but I was in a discussion where it was called into question whether or not there was utility associated with a four-year degree. what can you learn in 4 years that's going to still be valid upon graduation? So I have many questions more than I have answers, but I just want to give you a sense of, from a future of work perspective, how do we merge that with economic trends, with the rapidity of technology, with the lack of supply for the demand of the kinds of things, the new economy. I mean, I think it's great to bring back coal mining jobs if that's even possible, and I don't mean to be political, but truly. But I was just in a conversation with a Chinese gentleman, his name is Fei Lu Ying, part of an organization called Sinovation. And the things that they're doing in China, I mean, if there's ever a place, coal, right? They're not focusing on that industry at all. They're all about the technology. Right? And so lots of questions and lots of observations, but there are challenges, I think, for all of us in the region and the country writ large.
Thank you. And just carrying on the technology theme real quickly, approximately 25% of the jobs in our region that are being advertised right now are computer technology related, which is about 3 times the concentration of the national average. So very unique for our region. Something else that's very unique for our region we saw this morning is the diversity. And when we think about our diversity in this region, it's really also the diversity of our diversity. You heard the statistic today, 47% children with a foreign-born parent. Last year, a national best-selling book, A Nation of Nations, was written with Fairfax County really as a backdrop in that regard. So that's unique to our region. But from your perspectives, and maybe quickly go in the opposite direction here, what is it about our diversity in Northern Virginia that makes that a workforce development asset?
An asset. Not a liability, okay. So you want to go this way? Me first, or we're going back?
Well, y'all can flip, whatever.
You're up.
That means they don't want to answer the question. So I think about Freddie, as I said, 55% of our employee base identifies as non-white, and we have a very large representation of Asian employees. And Asia is sort of a misnomer, right? Because it could be India, it could be Korea, it could be, a broad swath of the earth called Asia. And this concentration tends to be in the technology field. Now, what's interesting to me, just in terms of the richness of that, I've had the good fortune of working in India. And one of the things that really amazed me about the time that I spent there is you would have what to us as Westerners would seem like really extreme, abject poverty, right? And you'd see these slums, and people would emerge from the slums. First of all, the women are beautifully dressed in these saris. They're just breathtaking. So there's that. So you're sort of a little bit of a dislocation here of what's happening. But they'd be on cell phones. And you go, I don't get it. Like, how is anybody here able to afford a cell phone? Well, the rapidity of India will wait for technology before jumping on it. So they skip things, right? So they skipped pagers and went right to cell phones, which is a very interesting thing. So when those folks from those kinds of parts of the world where they literally skip whole iterations of technology that we experience, there's sometimes in our environment, you got to hold them back a little bit because they're going 2 or 3 generations beyond where the technology already is. And so you almost have to run to keep up with them as you're inventing models and new computational ways to think about things. So it's just a really interesting tension because on the one hand you go, so yet are coming from these parts of the world that are so less sophisticated than we think we are. Meanwhile, though, their technological advances are literally leapfrogging beyond ours. And how do you keep up with that and incorporate that into the business models?
Lovely, you've watched the diversity wave across Northern Virginia over, as we heard the numbers this morning. Why is that our asset?
Well, I think it's a wonderful asset, and when I was getting ready for this, I was looking up about immigration, and I wasn't able to find on Northern Virginia, but for Virginia, 1 in 8 are immigrants, foreign-born, and that's pretty for Virginia. That's 12%, 13%. That's pretty average with the nation. I think if we took Northern Virginia, we'd see more, and I think that the other thing that I've noticed is that high education rate, or 40% have college degrees, which I think is wonderful. I think where we need to be working on is making ourselves immigration friendly to those that aren't in that 40%. I think it's really important, and we know that we want people to have college degrees, we want them to go into technology, and that's where our jobs are. But not everyone's going to be able to make that jump in one generation. So we really need to be able to introduce it to everybody and be what I call immigration friendly. A great area that's immigration friendly is Boston. They actually didn't start that way. I did some research and it was kind of very anti-climate. But in a 10-year period of time, they have 29% of their jobs are being filled by immigrants because they changed the climate in the city. They made it more welcoming. They did the English as a second language, and they started teaching digital skills while they were learning English as a second language. They really embedded it into their community. One of the success stories they've had is they got General Electric to move from Connecticut to downtown or into the Boston area, even with the big dig and all the traffic that they have there. I mean, so that's a great success story that I think we need to look at and say, we do have the diversity, but are we doing the climate? Are we making it friendly for all levels to get retrained, get reskilled, find those internships? I think that's where, as a community, we should spend a little bit more time, and our conversation should be around everything in workforce development. Is it friendly to everyone in that scheme, or is it only friendly to those that have college degrees?
5 more minutes before we open up to just a couple of questions. So I want to get one on the table here, and Ken, maybe you could lead off first. But kind of continuing on the regional theme, when you look at our region, and Lovey sort of played into this from the diversity standpoint right now, what do you see from a workforce development perspective that's going well in our region, and perhaps even more importantly for us, helping us look in the mirror, what could we be doing better?
Yeah, so without a doubt, the international perspective is huge. I mean, the internet was, in essence, evolved, a global internet out of here. And certainly we had a proliferation of tech companies that I think really benefited from some of those international entrepreneurs. Diversity of thought, diversity of teams lead to innovation. I'm fortunate to have a diverse team within my community, and I find that it's not just like the new ideas, but the conflict on ideas and that cultural relevancy that comes into play become really important. One of the things that I'm super excited about is the mandatory CS educational standards within Virginia. I believe Virginia was on the forefront on that, and that impacts, if we want to really think about this long term, if we want to think about structural workforce development, we have to be beginning with youth. And so I'm excited about that. I think that Virginia, the region has done a really good job at attracting tech companies into the region. Amazon has certainly a good footprint within Northern Virginia, and there are other tech companies that find Northern Virginia their home. I think the focus in on transportation is a big deal. I think it's going to continue to be a bigger deal as we continue to grow the region. That there are, and actually, I'm going to point to your organization, Northern Virginia Community College, that I think has just done an amazing job. I've looked at the diversity or the demographics there, and in addition to obviously focus in on people of color and military veterans, I think is fantastic through your organization. And your organization's desire to become tech forward, to really switch a lot of the way it thinks about workforce into alignment with the community, I think has been fantastic. What are needs? Well, from a education perspective, we need to rapidly upskill, or we need to rapidly encourage educators to gain skills in both computer science, computational thinking, and in data sciences. I believe every kid, I think we should embed data sciences into K-8 education. Data is not columnar anymore. It's coming streaming. it's coming at such fast rate, and because the cloud provides you such ability to access, use machine learning and so on to get into this, we need to rethink about education coming on down. I think that Northern Virginia can really benefit from a deeper partnership with DC. I sit on the Mayor's Innovation Inclusion for Technology Council. I think the region has great power together. And certainly there's obviously a lot of diversity that can be encouraged from DC. And while your school, and I believe GMU are doing great things from a diversity perspective, there's tons of higher educational institutions that really aren't getting deeply involved with K-12, that aren't creating pathways, long-term pathways for students. We have the entrepreneurship community, which has done great things, also needs to get deeper involved with education. And there's other things I would echo around that constant reskilling and constant, do we have facilities? I think about this within Amazon. So we have major endeavors to techify our non-tech workers. Some things are working really well, some things we're testing out and so on. People transitioning to new companies, to new jobs, that is a nature of this fast-moving world, this fast-moving technology. But we should also be doing more stuff to help upskill people in place when they're at existing jobs, to prepare them for those next translations. So I think that I love that base of CS education for all. I love what the incentives that have been provided into communities to get better involved in diversity. I think deeper encouragement, apprenticeship programs, so on, can help drive that harder.
Thank you. I want to leave time for a couple of questions if we could, or one question if we may, maybe one question. But I would also like to maybe emphasize something too. You talked about this, you just said upskilling in place. I think that's important for Northern Virginia, and here's the reason why. Northern Virginia has a very strong relative job base. But Northern Virginia's challenge is our labor force is growing much slower than most other metropolitan regions of the country, and particularly in Northern Virginia. And the reason why it's difficult to move into Northern Virginia and live in Northern Virginia. I mean, we've seen negative millennial growth here in the last year. And so that's why I think upskilling of people who are in place, that's why, the Manassas parks and all the public schools are so important. That's why the George Mason universities are so important. I'm biased, that's why Nova's important, but I do think that this notion of upskilling in place for Northern Virginians is going to be crucial for the economics of our region, where the jobs are plentiful, but the people aren't flocking to. And so something to keep in mind. Any question from the audience before we wrap up for our panel? Anything, Lovey or Jacqueline, in that last regard, anything else before we close here?
I would add that an area that I think we should look at is we do need the college graduates, but 40% or 45% of people that start college don't finish. So that is a great group of people that we need to continue to upscale. If we could get them and incentivize the jobs for a first certification, going to reimbursement tuition by the businesses, we could go a long way to filling those jobs by concentrating on that group of people also, because they're really, they're trying to find where they're going to land. We'd rather them land in a place that they're being trained and can move into a career than move into something that's a minimum wage that they find that they're just stagnant. And I think that's really important to Northern Virginia, because we need that workforce. Let's find them, let's get them. I know that David Hunn's program has some people in there, but we need to find the programs that are reaching out to that group of people before they find themselves stuck in a non-career type job. And I think it's extremely important for Northern Virginia.
If you don't mind, I'd like to take a photograph of you all. If nothing else, I'm a wife and mom who works out of the home, and so when I get home, my kids will go, "What was your day like?" And I'd like to be able to at least give them a photograph of, this is part of my day. So if you would, cheese. Thank you.
Turn it back over.
Thank you.